work that top, then run that again, run that again. I don't really chat, mean what I said. Put it in a top, not climb on a bed. When you go to work that top, then. Work that top, then somewhere in the crowd. Run that again, run that again. I don't really chat, mean what I said. Put it in a top, not climb on a bed. When you go to work that top, then run that again, run that again. I don't really chat, mean what I said. Put it in a top, not climb on a bed. Run that again, run that again. I don't really chat, mean what I said. Put it in a top, not climb on a bed. When you go to work that top, then run that again, run that again. I don't really chat, mean what I said. Put it in a top, not climb on a bed. When you go to work that top, then.
Cheers. Hi, I'm James. I've got a fancy title, work at Media Arts Lab. Before I get started, I just really want to thank D&AD. Very honored to be here. Thank you for coming to see me. If you don't know, Media Arts Lab is Apple's dedicated agency. We work for Apple and only Apple for about 30 years now. So, yeah, one client, deep, and yeah, cover all the parts of the business. I never thought I'd be at a design festival talking about advertising, but here we are. Before I worked at Media Arts Lab, I spent a good 15 years deep in the world of brand identity, systems, brand guidelines, a small snapshot of some of the work. I think some of my ex-colleagues are probably here, so big up JKR. You know, we had a process, right? I think this is probably familiar to a lot of people. You know, we define the brand, we create the identity, we refine that idea, create some assets and some guidelines, and you know, call it a day most of the time. You know, this is usually where, you know, when I was working in design agencies, this is where it would stop. You know, we would hand it off and hope for the best. But I started to really wonder, you know, what happens after that point? You know, is there more? You know, as a designer, could I do more? You know, going back to my JKR days, Duncan was one of those rare moments with a rebrand that it didn't end up in a PDF. We got to bring it through to the launch out in the world, you know, and you know, it was amazing to see the kind of reaction and the kind of response to color, 2 colors, a typeface, and a logo, and some beautiful photography. But unfortunately, most of the time, you know, the assets we built to stand out weren't being used, or they're being misused. And you know, shaping the direction was awesome, but you know, the one thing I wanted to do was actually be part of making the work taken out into the world. You know, so that's why I ended up talking to Media Arts Lab. Happily ever after, right? You know, got my wish. Unfortunately, not quite. You know, there was a few things we had to get right first. Reality is, you know, and I'm pleased to say this is evolving and changing at pace, but you know, especially when I arrived, you know, designers are not generally hired to think creatively, traditionally ad agencies. Some of the observations I had when I arrived, I was like, why is there a design department? Why is there a creative department? Why do they not sit together? You know, the second one was like, why are designers brought in at the end of a process? You know, when you know, really, you know, I spent the last 15 years being brought in at the brief at the beginning. You know, and it became really evident there was like limited awareness of like the creative contributions and capabilities of a design thinker. You know, I think I wrote a long list in my notebook of some of some of the requests I got in the first few months. You know, comping, decks, typesetting. I like typesetting. personally, but extending templates, mock-ups, lots of mock-ups, resizing. You might ask why didn't I walk away? I thankfully had a leadership team who brought me in, who wanted me to create change and like flip the script and just I had the full backing of that, which is the only reason I could have done what I've done. But this is really why I took the job. I think advertising needs design thinkers. I always talk about brand out, not narrative in. So I think when you start with the brand, the codes, its voice, its point of view, and then you can build the work out. You get to more iconic, more distinctive communication, especially when you think, every day, thousands of brands are fighting for our attention, a fraction of your attention, and we can't just be clever. We have to be clear, fast, and distinctive. I remember at design school, I'm sure everyone's had the same lesson, when you're designing logos, you have one chance to add meaning, one chance for metaphor. And I've taken this into working in communications as well, because fundamentally infusing, more than one idea into an idea risks cluttering the message. Adding more and you start losing people. Because when we design ideas, they work with and without a 30-second TV spot in the smallest proportions for any country, in any language. And they can grab someone's attention in 2 seconds. So going back to that point about attention. Part of the way I was able to kind of like start to implement a new philosophy is like coining a phrase, and ideas by design was something which probably, you've probably seen a bunch of times, but it was a way I could kind of quantify in the advertising environment the power of design and the tension between ideas. So this is our philosophy, which we kind of use internally to socialize, and also like the ways we kind of describe how we approach. Fundamentally though, it's design at the core of ideas that are simple, striking, and impossible to ignore. I'm going to talk a little bit about like several approaches of how we kind of implement that thinking, approaches to better ideas essentially. I think what really changed the work for us is not just having, a token designer in a room. It's really about, bringing that mindset to everything we do. The first one is approaching campaigns like a logo, one shot to say everything. And I think the thing I'm most proud of is I haven't changed how I approach or practice design. I may change the names of things. I may not call it a visual identity. I might call it a campaign, but I found that way to insert myself in the work is like still the same practice. I'm still thinking about, how I design a logo, how I do a system, and such like. I think this one is really important, especially working with a brand like Apple. You have to create ideas and visual ideas which are universal, simple, and can travel across the globe. This is our ambition every time. A single, clear visual idea that transcends language and location. For example, I think when we had to communicate or launch the lightest MacBook Pro ever, this was one of the first ideas we had on the wall. What if the laptop felt like a feather? And we skipped over it. Went on to went around the houses, and just came back to that really simple, true idea, and that became the fundamental basis of the campaign.
Let me down easy. Let me down. Let me down easy. Oh.
Did it all myself. Um, also, also in contrast, and I'm sure you understand the cycle of Apple and the products we launch, and I think the other one, which was, one of my favorite kind of like simple ideas, a childhood reference came to me immediately when we were asked to kind of launch the new MacBook, the MacBook Pro, not the Air. Again, the most powerful, the most utilitarian machine they've made. Instantly thought of Star Wars and the way the Star Destroyer comes in at the beginning. Kind of giddily started talking to that with the team, and again, just that true translation of that simple metaphor into a whole campaign idea. I think we also talk about crafting campaigns with the same discipline as visual identity. This is, again, the semiotics and different verbiage, but, that's how we think, especially for Apple, just what are those iconic visuals that people will remember and will stick with. And especially as you think about the attention, we have the challenge of attention at the moment. I think these visual cues are like shortcuts. They help us tell the story faster, and they're most of the time they're louder than words alone ever could be. This was a recent project for Apple Music, 100 Best Albums. I think this project started as a workaround the idea for licensing, because we couldn't license 100 albums and the imagery and the artist. But again, we found a way to kind of reinvent that challenge into a kind of game for fans to decode. The idea that real music lovers, if they really love music, they'll understand these symbols represent the albums.
Legends on 3, 2, 1. Let's go. Look like Chex Mix is supposed to be blue. She know it's 2 seats, so she leave her best friends. Bust out my dad face, your chain is a necklace. Go that, please, don't go that, me, left wrist, go that, right wrist, go that, necklace, go that, sis, go that, go that, me. I had to hit my designer for sneaks, double dip mine in the bleach, I'm black for sure. Miami Beach, pull up like LeBron with the heat. Walk on this beat like I'm walking up, Poland, got glass that I'm holding and guap that I'm throwing. Some loving it, and some Rick Owens in different color diamonds like I'm just rolling. How many times can I tell you I'm How many times can I tell you I'm go there without niggas acting like they do not know it?
Why, sir? See, every year I'm getting better as a writer. And when it comes to the flow, I'm getting nicer. And if it's getting in a song, but a cipher. It doesn't matter because I'm still getting money though. The only reason why you're hating cause
at first I couldn't figure it out, but then, the money on the hook, it never mind.
Don't wanna see you do great. Rather they see you fall off and then watch your whole ego deflate. Don't give a damn what you make. I see the jealousy, boy, that's a horrible trait.
I spot the hate, no binoculars. This how it feels to be popular. They send the shots, no photographer.
Don't give a damn, that ain't stopping me.
Go that, me, yeah.
It's a really big fucking screen. It's cool. Anyone Harry Styles fan? Well, if you want, we can talk Harry Styles. So a couple of years ago, we did the latest iteration of the Silhouettes campaign for Apple to talk about the spatial audio feature, and again, just an example of like essentially a visual identity. it's iconic. It's probably been on my mood boards for 20 years. I think it's a graphic design idea, masquerading as a campaign. But again, it's silhouettes, it's movement, it's music, it's color. It's built from Apple brand codes, and again, it's a great example of just like, campaign, yes, but really it's a visual identity system.
Excuse me, green tea, music for a sushi restaurant. All rice, Scooby-Dooby-Doo-Doo-Doo. I'm not going to get lost. I'm not going to go wrong. Staying cool. It's 'cause I love you, babe, in every kind of way. Just a little taste. You know I love you, baby.
Can't believe no one likes Harry Styles. You're heathens. Again, a campaign, the visual identity says everything without saying a word, in every city, country, in every language. The power of distinctive assets, a familiar theme at D&AD, but, type, color, iconography, motion, in advertising, they do more than just look good. For us, it's about using them in the same way I did at, when I was working in brand and design, flex, evolve. Sometimes they are the idea. Color becomes the headline. The typeface can become the voice. The logo becomes the story. We've recently been working with Major League Soccer because Apple are the exclusive broadcast partner. And it's the 30th season of the MLS this year, and Apple were looking to make a statement and also remind MLS fans that Apple is the place to watch all the games. So they asked us to think about an activation idea, a way we can kind of like raise awareness of Apple as Apple TV as the partner. So this is the work we put out in the world this year. As well as bringing new shapes of ideas to Media Arts Lab and Apple, I think again, using design, as a way to kind of extend the story as a distinctive asset. For example, I think, Fuzzy Feelings was the holiday film from last year, which Apple did. All stop motion, made of felt materials. The brief to our team was, how do you kind of enrich that story even more? And we created a whole typeface, handmade, in the same style as the film. So it was we still add layers of depth as well to using design to some of the more traditional narrative pieces. Right, I've run out of time, so I'm going to try to move quickly. Again, this is, again, like, I just love this idea because whilst we're all thinking of like really high production, big polished ideas for the Apple Music the Super Bowl halftime show, one of the designers brought this idea to the table. It's just like thinking about like distinctive assets of brands, but also like people, and the Rihanna avatar has been consistent. This little drawing has been there for like, 8, 9 years. So we saw that as an opportunity to kind of tell a story and create this tiny little social asset to kind of announce her arrival at the Super Bowl.
Where have you been? 'Cause I never see you. Where are you hiding from me? Somewhere in the crowd.
Simple, So to wrap it up, I think the biggest change for us was kind of moving design from a function to a foundation. Really thinking of design not as a department, as a mindset. And I think if anyone else, I think if there are agencies with departments of design, I think it's it's an outdated idea and it's about collaboration and integration. I was worried I'd fired myself in the first year, but I said the problem was the design department. I said like we need to remove that barrier. Less downstream briefs. No more waiting to be asked, and it brought everyone together. This means that there's creators thinking about design from the outset, not just designers. There's we're putting everyone in the same kind of like space, and different skills, same goal, one creative team. Everyone is creative. And I think it's important. Sameness is safe. Difference pushes the work. And that's really what I like to. Even within the design practice, the designs I'm bringing in, we're looking at different shapes of talent, and multidisciplinary kind of never finding the same person twice. So today, I think these are the words I wrote down. And so, my first year at Mao, and I think this is definitely how we've arrived in 25. We're very much feeling like the design is now conceptual, not executional. The final furlong, that's long gone. It's much more foundational. Doing, not thinking, to thinking and making. Production to creative, support to integrated. And it's has to be said. I'm very lucky to work for a brand like Apple who respects design. It's a benchmark, and the level and expectations is insane, and but it's great to kind of spend every day trying to live up to that kind of ambition. Thanks.
Thanks, James.